So, we worked with Laura and her team at University of Chicago, and so they looked for a comprehensive wireless solution, proves the key to supporting the future of leading-edge care for University of Chicago. So, University of Chicago Medicine grasped this concept of comprehensive wireless. And University of Chicago Medicine, really everything they do in their IT shop is based on and ties to these 5 pillars. And that is how the IT infrastructure, the IT department can support people, the patient experience and services, safety and quality, finance, meeting budget, and long-term positioning. It's got to be for the future as well. So everything they do ties, they focus on tying to these 5 pillars. And so when they looked at the wireless requirements for this facility, they looked at the 4G, Wi-Fi, and telemetry as the 3 primary drivers. But it's not just about getting signal inside the building, right? So that's coverage. We want to make sure we have signal everywhere. We also want to make sure we have capacity. If you go back to those wireless trends where we see the data, the huge growth in data, right? So that capacity requirement is a huge requirement. But the third one, we call it the 3 C's, the third one is about criticality. That if I think about guest, enterprise, and clinical use of wireless, then I might want to define my wireless infrastructure based on those levels of criticality, so we call criticality. And then there's the question of ownership, and this one we'll spend a little bit of time on here, and I'll make sure we stay on time. There were a number of different business models that were presented to UC Medicine. For example, there are folks that will come to your hospital, and they came to University of Chicago and said, we'll put a free distributed antenna system inside your hospital. Free. Sounds pretty good, right? And if you let us put that in, we'll bring the other carriers on, and we'll do these various things for you. Well, what happens is, when you do that, if I'm the one putting in the infrastructure and paying for it, then I'm going to make sure I satisfy my business interests first, right? And University of Chicago Medicine felt that in order to achieve their goals, the 5 pillars, that ownership and control of the infrastructure was fundamental to that. That it had to be an infrastructure owned, paid for by the medical center, so that they could make sure that that infrastructure was delivering specifically what they wanted it to deliver for their patients, their staff, their guests, etc. And so we don't want these competing interests. And the way to eliminate that competing interest issue is via ownership and control, right? And we spend a lot of time in the marketplace with hospitals, and one of the questions that we ask all the time is, if you deem wireless to be critical to the mission of the hospital, life and critical mission of the hospital, name any other critical infrastructure that you don't own, manage, and control to the benefit of what you want to do in that facility, right? And so we see wireless in that same vein. The other piece of it is when wireless infrastructure is deployed, distributed antenna system, Wi-Fi, the hospital working with black box, we're able to define and control and identify how that's going to function. What we have absolutely no control over is what device manufacturers do, right? So in the cell phone world, your smartphones are very well behaved, right? Because Verizon, AT&T, and others, they license the frequency, they dictate to the manufacturers, Apple, Android, they dictate how those devices will perform against their network. It works very well. In Wi-Fi, wireless LAN, it's an unlicensed spectrum. Anybody can put a Wi-Fi card in a device and say it's now wirelessly enabled. And the performance range, the range of performance of those devices can be from way over here to way over there. Even the performance of Wi-Fi in a smartphone is unlicensed, right? So a smartphone being a dual-purpose device, the Wi-Fi side of that smartphone may in fact perform well or may not perform well at all. And I'll give you an example. The original iPhone. When the original iPhone came out, it was designed as a consumer device. And as consumers, we tend to use those devices in the Wi-Fi mode in a relatively stationary environment, i.e. wireless. but we're not using Wi-Fi in a mobility mode. We're not moving around a lot. And so we tend to sit at either at our home or we're at a Starbucks or something like that, and we're accessing the Wi-Fi. And so the roaming algorithm in that device was designed so that as you moved away from the signal source, that it would hang on to that signal source as long as possible. It would hang on to it, so you keep that session, keep that connection going. Even though there's a new source over here, there's a hotter signal, it would not let go, right? Because it's designed with the consumer in mind. An enterprise device, like a cell phone, when I move away from the signal source and I move towards a hotter signal source, as soon as that source is hotter, boom, go, roam. That's how cell phones work. As you're driving down the highway, it's handing off from cell tower to the next strongest signal. In a Wi-Fi environment, we want that as well as we get into mobile types of devices. But there's no control, it's unlicensed spectrum. So, as University of Chicago Medicine was building out their wireless environment, what they looked at is what we call cooperative device testing to ensure smooth rollout. And so what we do together is any device that gets rolled out in the hospital. Now, again, cannot control devices that individuals bring into the building, but those devices that are used in the enterprise and in the clinical grade, those devices are tested for compatibility. So because we have this comprehensive wireless infrastructure, and we know the precise performance characteristics of that throughout the hospital, we can then take a device, we can test that device against those criteria and ensure that that device will work properly inside the hospital. What we don't want, and what University of Chicago Medicine does not want, is the application, the use, the workflow that's tied to that device to fail because the device failed, right? And we see this a lot in hospitals around the country, right? And so when University of Chicago Medicine rolls out a device driving an application or a workflow, they know before it goes out that device is going to work because they understand their comprehensive wireless environment, they understand how that device is going to work in that environment, and they have flawless rollouts. Now, so they're spending their time and attention on the application, the use case, right? How the users are using it, as opposed to, is this thing getting us signals, is it connecting, is it logging off, etc., right? So it's very, very important from that perspective. And actually created a test lab environment inside the hospital to do this device testing. So we actually do it on-prem there at Chicago.